This is the IDP After Show.
Hello and welcome to the IDP After Show. I'm Jase Abbey, and tonight I'm bringing you the Week 3 episode of the Rankings Show. Every Wednesday I look at some of the biggest risers and fallers in my rankings, sharing and comparing my thoughts with a different guest. Our audience is in for a bit of a treat tonight, as I'm happy to say that we have one of our own, the very talented Jeff Pomazal, writer for the IDP Show. Jeff, thanks for coming on. We've kind of collaborated on a few shows before, but I think this is the first time that I've had you all to myself, isn't it? So how are things?
Very good, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. You're great at what you do, and it's just an honor to be on here with you. So.
Too kind, but yeah, for sure, it's really good to have you on. So there was quite a few interesting takeaways from the games last weekend, wasn't there? There was some sort of standout rookie performances. We saw some surprise starts from some veterans that we've kind of assumed would be an afterthought, and then we had the usual sort of slew of injuries as well. It was kind of interesting to see, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think after week 2, we start to get an idea of where players are kind of falling and schemes that defensive coordinators are tending to use. And, week 1 is just kind of a mess for everybody, offensively and defensively. You just don't know where anything's coming from. But by week 2, we start to see some trends and kind of make plans going forward.
Yeah, absolutely right. So let's just try and unpack some of that here and talk about how it's affected our view of these guys and our rankings. So let's start with the linebackers first. So what linebacker do you have as a riser for week 3? Who do you like?
Well, I don't know how much of a riser he is because he's near the top already, but I think Quay Walker is just an outstanding linebacker going forward. Here you have him, I think, ranked at like LB4, which is right near the top. There's not a lot of room for him to grow, but he's well worth the investment and everything that he has. I see him ranked some places as like linebacker 22, even behind Devontae Campbell, which I feel is like blasphemy because Walker's just having an outstanding season. I know he did have that touchdown, which inflates his stats a little bit over 2 weeks, but even without that touchdown, he's really still outscoring very well. He's like LB1, even with that touchdown taken away. He's like a point behind Zaire Franklin. So Campbell's losing a few snaps on early downs. They're taking him off the field, and I don't know if that's just a scheme planning or if it's something to try to keep Campbell healthy over the whole season, which is something he hasn't really been able to do in the last few years. So I think Walker, coming off his last game, he played 82 snaps and he had 19 tackles. 11 of them were solo. That's like a tackle every 4 plays. So he's literally getting points every drive for you. So I think he's just super efficient in everything that he does. And I feel like he's LB1 this season, but maybe even LB1 in Dynasty at this point. So
Yeah, we're totally in sync on this one. Like you say, I've got him as my LB4, one behind Bobby Wagner and one ahead of Zaire Franklin. And like you said, I already had him ranked pretty high, but after seeing him take over that every down role from Campbell in week 2 and delivering a game like he did, I'm now completely sold. Like you said, that production, 19 tackles, a QB hit, 3 QB hurries and a pass breakup. It's just incredible production. So, we obviously don't expect something like that to happen every week, but I think anyone pointing to his week 1 performance, and I think he had an interception and about 3 or 4 tackles, as sort of something to detract from what he's done, might be overlooking the fact that he only played sort of 66% of the snaps that week after suffering the concussion on that interception return. So I also like that he has a decent matchup against the Saints this weekend. The Panthers linebackers kind of had a field day against them in week 2. I think Luvu and Grugier-Hill, who only came in partway through the game for Shaq Thompson, they both had huge games. So yeah, like you say, I think Walker's right up there with the best of them this season, and he's going to be one of the best for years to come. So who's your second guy? Who's your second linebacker that you like?
My second guy is kind of a guy who's just kind of came out of nowhere. Robert Spillane of the Las Vegas Raiders, formerly of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Raiders brought in absolutely no one this offseason as far as like free agent signings. Really no investment on that side of the ball. He's rocking the green dot, calling the plays. He hasn't come off the field at all on defense. He's played all 142 snaps for them. He has 20 combined tackles. The one thing that I'm a little leery about is he does have six missed tackles already this season. And so if you can kind of clean that up a little bit, I think he'd even be more elite. Even with those 6 missed tackles, I'm not worried about him losing his job at all. I think they have like Luke Masterson behind him. So there's no fear of him losing his role next to Jevon Holland. So last week, just like Walker, he played a ton of snaps. He played 77 snaps last week against the Bills. He had 14 combined tackles and a sack. This week he gets Pittsburgh, which isn't going to be as efficient of an offense, so he might not get as close to 77 snaps, but I just think his ceiling and his production, he's going to well then make up for that. So he's I think you have him ranked right near mid LB2 range, LB17, and I'm anything late LB1, early LB2 is kind of where I'm seeing him. I really like his upside going forward.
Yeah, he started super fast, hasn't he? Like you say, I've got him ranked as the LB17, which is quite a rise from last week where I had him as the LB38. So I kind of wanted to see him hold down that role for a second week, and that's exactly what he did. As you said, like you pointed out, he kind of missed a bunch of tackles against the Bills, but I'm not too concerned about that in the same way of you, because missed tackles hasn't been something that he struggled with during his career, so I'm quite comfortable with the idea that might be a bit of an anomaly. And there's also a positive way we can look at that, isn't there, too, in the sense that he had a productive stat line. He was really good, and as good as it was, it could have been even more impressive. He was in position to make those tackles. So I like the call, and clearly because he's ridden so much in my rankings, I'm pretty keen on him as well.
Where he was this offseason, like during the summer, like even like best ball leagues, he was like LB 70s and stuff like that, and slowly over the the course of the offseason, he slowly started to rise. Well, now all of a sudden he's like an LB 4 or 5. Now like you had him last week, he was an LB 3, and now he's like an LB 2. That's quite a trend for him to go from a back end linebacker like you're just picking up maybe to hit, and now all of a sudden he's like a weekly starter for many teams. So
yeah, exactly. He's one of the guys. I in one of my favorite leagues, my home league actually. I kind of punted the linebacker position. I didn't keep any. It's a dynasty league. I didn't keep any linebackers at all. And I've kind of worked I've worked hard, but I've been a bit shrewd, I guess, in picking up some of these guys like the Spillanes, like the Grugier-Hills, Quincy Williams as well. These guys that kind of fly under the radar for most people, but who looked like they might have a pretty big role going into this season. And I feel pretty stocked to the position right now. And my next guy is another one of those guys who I've kind of dropped a couple of times and picked up a few times. But Nicholas Morrow, for me, it's not a sexy pick, right? And we know he might only have value until Nakobe Dean returns, but I've got him ranked as the LB 37 for week 3. That's one behind Cody Barton and one ahead of Quincy Williams. The Eagles kind of threw us a curveball last weekend, didn't they? I think most of us expected Christian Ellis to be given the nod to replace Dean alongside Zach Cunningham, especially considering the Eagles kept Ellis on the 53-man roster and had to bring up Morrow from the practice squad after demoting him just a few weeks back. But it was, as we know, it was Morrow who got the nod, and he not only leapfrogged Ellis, but he also led the unit with a 95% snap share, which was pretty surprising to me. He didn't light things up. He only had something like 3 tackles. I think he had a QB hit as well. But that should be, I think, nearer his floor than his ceiling until Dean returns. Like some of the other guys we were just talking about, I like Morrow's matchup this weekend as well. And Cunningham for that matter. We saw how the Bears linebackers did when playing against Tampa last weekend. Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards combined for like 26 combined tackles. And obviously Ivan Pace had a big game against the Bucks in week 1 too. So yeah, quite a lot to like about Morrow for, in the short term at least. So yeah, he's my number 2.
He was wore the green dot too, I thought, right? And he was calling the plays.
Yeah, kind of surprising, but I don't know where they're at with him. Like I say, demoting him and then promoting him again. What they think of Ellis, I'm not sure. Doesn't seem to be as they don't seem to be as keen as we were thinking they were coming into this season. But yeah, I'm not complaining. Like I say, I've got a ton of Morrow everywhere, and I'm happy to reap the rewards for the next couple of weeks. And let's see what happens when Dean gets back. You've got to assume it's going to be Dean and Cunningham, but yeah, like I say, they've been thrown as curveballs, so I wouldn't rule anything out.
Yeah, he's kind of like, as a former or another podcaster once said, he's kind of like mom's meatloaf, right? He just kind of comes in and does his thing, and you're satisfied at the end of the day with his production. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not like I said before, he's not a sexy pick. I had him most of last season as well on a number of teams, and he was that guy that I don't think he missed a single snap all year or close to it. He didn't really do a huge amount, but those every down linebackers are not easy to come by. So as an LB3, I was quite happy to sort of kind of plug him in and just watch him run up the scores. Run up the scores has probably been a bit kind to him, but yeah, watch him exist is probably a better way of describing it.
Didn't Morrow finish last season as close to LB1 range? I mean, he did play every single snap. I think he was pretty close, like in that range. Like he racked up a ton of tackles for the Bears. So.
Yeah, maybe I'm not giving him his credit. To my mind, he was kind of subpar, but yeah, maybe because of the fact he didn't miss any snaps and played full time all year. Maybe his finish was better than I remember. Maybe it was the points per game that I'm a bit sore about. But so yeah, I've got Henry 2020 as my third guy. Now I originally had him as my number 50 linebacker in my rankings, but he did slide out to make room for Troy Anderson, who looks like he's going to play in week 3, or looks like he has a shot to play in week 3. But yeah, I mean, 202, his usage kind of skyrocketed last week, up from 34% in week 1 to 81% in week 2, essentially replacing Christian Harris as the Texans LB2 behind Denzel Perriman. A rare moment of kind of self congratulation, as I mentioned Harris as a faller in last week's episode. But yeah, it's either great for 2020 that D'Amico Ryans trusts him so early in his career, or it's a really bad look for Christian Harris, that Ryan's patience has worn so thin so quickly, despite the suggestions that we kept hearing about how Harris was ready to take that sort of step forward in year 2. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between those two. But yeah, Perriman didn't practice on Wednesday, so that's I'm not sure the reason, but that's something that could help 2020 see even more opportunities this week. But yeah, overall, I'm just encouraged to see a rookie guy get such a big slice of the pie so early in his career. But I'm not getting too carried away. I want to see that kind of continue for another week, another couple of weeks before I recommend him anywhere near that sort of LB3, LB4 category. So he's unranked, so it's not really fair to call him a riser, but he's someone that I'm kind of bearing in mind as someone who might be there in future weeks if his usage continues as it did last week.
I'm totally with you. I had him this week in my waiver wire ad article. He was one of my top linebackers to add this week because of that reason. Him and Christian Harris basically just swapped out snaps from week 1 to week 2. They almost played identical games, comparison for snap count. And 202 had 7 or 8 combined tackles in the game, playing 81% or 46 of the 57 snaps or something like that. That's pretty good production on the day. So.
Yeah, really good. And I do have, it's not a specific player as such, but I kind of wanted to mention some of last week's injury replacements, all of whom kind of played a pretty big role in place of the usual starters. So there's sort of Kenneth Murray filling in for Eric Kendricks for the Chargers, and sort of Nick Neiman taking on that sort of Murray role. You had Nate Landman of the Falcons replacing Troy Anderson, and then obviously Kamu Grugier-Hill stepping in for Shaq Thompson for the Panthers. As far as rankings for those guys are concerned, I've got all four guys either unranked or in the low 40s, and all are subject to change as injury updates on those starters becomes available, with the exception of KGH. As we know, Thompson's out long term, so I wanted to mention them because I wanted to just remind the audience to check on the injury status of those guys, specifically Kendricks and Troy Anderson closer to the weekend, and be ready to slot some of those replacements into your lineups if you're in need of a linebacker. So yeah, not really a specific guy, but more a collection of guys, I guess. So I think we're ready to talk about the fallers, the guys we don't like this week. Who is your first guy?
I've got some pretty big names on this list. Some really underperforming studs who you took pretty early or had to take pretty early and just aren't really performing at this time. And a lot of the names that we mentioned as our risers, you could have had super late and super cheap and are putting up, in some places, double what these guys are producing. So my first dud is going to be Nick Bolton.
Ooh.
Yeah, he's highly ranked everywhere. I see that you have him as a late LB1 right now, even higher in a lot of other places, and I think that has a lot to do with his name value and recognition right now. Production just hasn't been there. He only has 9 solo tackles and 6 assists on the year. He has no big splash plays, no interceptions, no forced fumbles, nothing like that right now. He also showed up on the injury report today with an ankle injury, so I don't know if that's something to kind of monitor going forward. I don't know if he's going to miss any time with it or anything like that, but I have him more as like a mid LB2 right now, just until he starts producing. I wanted to ask you, if someone offered you like a Jordan Brooks, Dre Greenlaw-ish type player, and maybe like a pick, like a second or a third, what side would you be on? A Bolton side or like a Brooks pick side?
Hey, I would probably stick with Bolton for now. And the reasons why is I'm not overly concerned with what we've seen or what we haven't seen from Bolton just yet. Like you say, he's kind of been dealing with that ankle injury this week, so I'm curious as to whether or not that played a part. And I saw somebody on X, it might have been Nate Markham, mentioned that the rotation may have been planned due to the humidity and the Chiefs trying to avoid players from cramping up. So yeah, I'm not as concerned as you when it comes to Bolton, and I'm kind of trying to remind myself we're just 2 games in and things could change very quickly for him. So yeah, that's the kind of the reason why I've kept him as my LB10. And while that is slightly lower than I had him last week, I think I had him as like the LB4 or 5 last week, I still view him as an LB1. But yeah, I understand your concerns. It's definitely something I want to keep an eye on this week and possibly a week or 2 after that, once he's fully healthy and clear of this ankle injury. So yeah, I'd in that sort of offer you mentioned now, I'd probably still stick with Bolton for now.
Yeah, it was just an offer that someone in our league was throwing out, and I was just kind of curious. I'm like, you're getting really good production right now with Jordan Brooks or Dre Greenlaw. Like, they're like very much producing, especially Greenlaw after his last week. He had an outstanding week 2. But then just I didn't know if that pick was enough to kind of tilt it, because I still view Bolton like you do as a high-end LB1. It's just like at some point, like, we need to see some production, So I was just picking the brain of the genius, so...
Oh, again, you're way too kind. You've got me confused with someone else. Yeah, I'd be more inclined with the Greenlaw option than I would with the Brooks option, because both guys are productive, but Greenlaw's actually a good player too, so I wouldn't have any concerns about further down the line, assuming this maybe this is a dynasty league. I wouldn't be concerned that Greenlaw would would lose a role or that his role would diminish. I know Brooks has a lot of fans. He's super productive. I've got him ranked quite highly again, or this week. Now he's fully healthy, but yeah, Greenlaw's just the superior player for me. So that's a closer one. Greenlaw for Bolton.
Who do you have as your fade? So your first.
Yeah, so my first guy is Alex Singleton. I've got him way down at 46, one behind Shaq Leonard and one ahead of Leighton van der Esch. Now I think I could be a week, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks too early with this one. But I'm concerned we're going to see a gradual move away from Singleton towards maybe Drew Sanders, or maybe it's just going to be Jewell going to be that 100% guy, and it's going to be a mixture of the other two behind him. He came off the field quite often against the Commanders as the Broncos kind of utilized that single linebacker look more often, and Jewell was the guy that kind of dominated the snap share. Singleton only played like 64% of the snaps, and that's his smallest snap share in the last 7 games, dating back to week 12 of last year. I know he's been one of the most efficient tacklers at the position in previous years, and that's kind of insulated us against this idea, against the fact, even that he's not an every down linebacker most weeks. He was for periods last year, but he wasn't an every down linebacker every week. So, he's got a talented rookie waiting in the wings behind him, and Sanders only saw a handful of snaps last week. But as I say, I think Sanders' role will continue to expand as he becomes more comfortable, and I think Singleton might be the guy that starts to lose out. So yeah, I'd still start Singleton as an LB3 or an LB4, but I think his fantasy managers need to keep a real close eye on the let's call it the division of labor, to steal Mike Tomlin's term, between Singleton and Sanders going forward.
And it's funny that you mentioned Singleton, because my next guy that I'm fading is his running mate in Josey Jewell right now. Again, he's playing a ton of snaps. He's got 120 snaps that he's played this year, but he only has like 15 tackles. And again, he's just 0 splash plays, no turnovers, just no extra bonus plays or anything like that. Not even a single quarterback hurry, I don't think, to this point. So if you looked up the definition of JAG in the dictionary, there might actually be a picture of Josey Jewell there. And I kind of had the same reasons to fade or not like Jewell that you thought was Sanders too. Like, I just see Sanders, they have a decent draft capital invested in. He like more than doubled his snaps from week 1 to week 2. So I just, eventually I can see him getting on the field more at the expense of either Singleton, like you said, or, maybe even Jewell. But I see that you have like Jewell ranked as like LB20 right now. I've seen him as high as like LB11, and I just don't see the return in him, in his play at this point. And the Broncos defense, the Broncos as a team, I think are trying to find their identity. There's a lot of stuff going on between Peyton and Russell Wilson, and I just think that team is kind of looking for an identity. They're kind of like the Chicago Bears of the AFC right now, in my opinion. So they're just trying to figure that out. So I've got Jewell closer to a LB3 than I do a higher or mid LB2 right now. So, but kind of the same reasons you mentioned with Sanders. I think he's going to be the future there. So,
yeah, you make some fair points. And yeah, like you said, some of the things I said about Singleton and the threat of Drew Sanders could very easily apply to Jewell too. And one point, thinking about it, one point that might back up your argument more than mine is that Singleton's under contract with no clear out until 2025, whereas Jewell, I think, is only under contract for this year. So they might, they might start to make plans to be without Jewell, in which case he might be the guy to lose out. But yeah, that snap share between the 3 guys is something I'm keeping a really close eye on. Week 2, it looked like Jewell would be the guy for the foreseeable, and Singleton might lose out. But things change, and things change fast. So let's see how this goes.
Not for long, right? Isn't that what the NFL stands for? So
yeah, that's it. Who's the second linebacker that you're fading this week?
I got Bobby Okereke for the Giants. Again, he's kind of fitting into the same mold as these other guys, playing a lot of snaps. He's out there all the time. He's highly ranked. People are investing a lot in at the beginning of the season to acquire them for their team, but just hasn't had the production yet. The Giants defense as a whole is just kind of meh right now. Like, they haven't generated any sacks as a defensive unit at all, the defensive linemen or linebackers. The only guy that's really even kind of shining right now is the safety, Jason Pinnock. And other than that, like, Okereke has 13 tackles and a forced fumble in 2 games, and that's not what you invested to have him on your team to do. He was expected to be coming from Indianapolis. He was going to be like the reincarnation of Blake Martinez when he played for the Giants, and we just haven't seen that from him. Yeah, like I said, he's just kind of, that whole defensive unit is just not what we thought it was going to be. You know, preseason they looked great. The end of last season they looked really great. It looked like that team was really the team to beat maybe in the NFC East, and they're not. So
yeah, like you say, he's some way behind the leaders at the position in tackles this year, and we're quite right to question why that is. I'm a little concerned too, but he's still playing every down. And that Giants defense hasn't been playing as many defensive snaps as some of the other teams. I noted that he's tied for 31st in total snaps at the linebacker position with 122, compared with the tackle leader, Zaire Franklin. He's had 154 snaps. So yeah, that's like 32 additional snaps, which after 2 games is quite significant. I just wonder whether things will level out a little bit in that sense as the Giants D catches up a little bit in playing time. With that said, Okereke has fallen in my rankings from LB11 to LB16 this week, so I don't think we're too far apart with our thinking. I'm giving him a bit of it's a bit of an excuse, I guess, but I'm kind of giving him a bit of a leeway in the sense that he's just not played as many snaps as those leaders in tackles at the linebacker position.
It's interesting that the player, or where he came from in Indianapolis, now the player that replaced him is kind of like the new Bobby Okereke for this year, because last year it was, obviously Franklin had a great season last year, but that was kind of more to do with Shaq Leonard's injury. But it's just interesting how the guy who replaced Okereke is now the new Okereke. So
yeah, you're right. And they just seem to keep churning out those linebackers in Indianapolis, don't they?
EJ Speed, go get him.
Yeah. Franklin came from nowhere, and Okereke came from nowhere, and yeah, it's interesting. So the next guy, interesting. We're talking about the Colts. The next guy that I'm fading this week is Shaquille Leonard. So he's dropped for me to 46, one behind Terrell Bernard and one ahead of Singleton. So the guys kind of covered some of this on the IDP show week 2 recap. And I agree with their assessment that Leonard just doesn't look like the same sort of impact guy that we've seen in years gone by. There's a chance that his snap count it's kind of been suffering. He kind of been recovering from yet another injury. He had that concussion in the preseason, but you'd think by this point he'd be over that. And so it also doesn't work in his favor that the other Colts linebackers are taking advantage of their kind of opportunities, like we talked about. Franklin is flying. EJ Speed is he's impressing everybody. So yeah, I mean it's probably too early to panic with Leonard too much. And believe me, I'd love to see him kind of return to his former glory, but I need to see it happen again before I have any sort of confidence in ranking him more highly than I do. And it just feels like such a long time ago that he was that guy, right?
Yeah, it had to be like 3 or 4 seasons ago that he was like just set the world on fire and like just reset the whole linebacker market. And then since then, injuries have, he had the back stuff and he was out for a season and he came back and then it was a hamstring. And then it was, like you said, this offseason, it was the concussion. And he's just, what is he in his 7th or 8th season? I think just things are starting to catch up to him and he just hasn't been that same player that he was, back in his prime. We all can relate, but...
Oh yeah, believe me. But yeah, like I said, I'd love to see him. I'd love to see him come back and be great again. I'm just not nearly as confident about the fact that might happen as I was even a year ago. So we'll move on to the defensive line then. So who do you like this week? Who do you love this week on the defensive line?
I'm not alone in my love for George Karlaftis this week. I know that he's just won the hearts and souls and minds of IDP managers everywhere. In game 1, he had 3 hurries and 0 sacks. The Chiefs realized that they needed to have Chris Jones back. They signed him. And in game 2, he came back and he had 3 hurries and then 2 sacks right away. And so I just think that Chris Jones effect just ripples through the whole defense and really kind of sets the tone. He draws attention. Karlaftis is able to get home on a couple sacks in week 2 where he didn't get home to in week 1. He's playing a ton of snaps. They have a high draft capital into him. He's played 112 snaps in just the 2 games. I think getting Kelsey back on that offensive side is going to be some positive game script for that offense. I think that offense obviously runs through Kelsey. He didn't look good last week, and the Chiefs' offense didn't look good last week as well. I think he gets healthier, that offense starts scoring some points, and then teams have to throw the ball. And I think that just leaves chances for Karlaftis to just tee off and get some more pass run. The reason I really like him is that he gets the Bears this weekend. The Bears have given up 4 sacks already, and they have 3 offensive linemen who have allowed 6 or more pressures through 2 games. So between 3 of their 5 offensive linemen, it's a sieve. And, guys like Chris Jones and Karlaftis and Dana I think they're going to have a great week against that Bears offense. Yeah.
I like the call. I agree with all your reasoning. Karlaftis lines up on that left edge more often than not, doesn't he? So he'll be going up against Darnell Wright, who's been one of the poorer guys on that poor offensive line of the Bears. Fields just gets sacked for fun. So yeah, it could be a big week for Karlaftis again this week. I will say I still think he's got room to grow as a pass rusher, and I say that as if that's some surprise. He's only in year 2. I'm a little bit behind others in where he's at in that journey, but I believe he'll get there. Another week against another big week in an easy matchup will go a long way to making me a believer. So yeah,
I know this is an IDP show. I know it's an IDP show, but do you feel that Fields is trying to prove that he's a pocket passer and just holding onto the ball too long than just be an athlete and go make plays? Because I think some of the Bears offensive line woes falls on Fields too, and I just don't know if he's trying to prove everyone hey, I'm a passer, and maybe that's what's giving these defenses chances to tee off on him and making his offensive line look worse than they really are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I kind of saw briefly. I saw a press conference where he was talking about how something along the lines. I'm not going to don't quote me on this because I might be a little off, but something about how he didn't feel like he was being himself, playing his own game. He was a bit robotic almost, going through the motions. So I feel like once he gets his feet under him, he will improve. I think he can only improve. But yeah, I'm not a massive believer. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't have any shares anywhere. Do you?
I do not. No. I don't know. Most of the leagues I'm in, they reward rushing yards and rushing touchdowns for QBs, but not overly so. If there was a league I was in where we rewarded those kind of stats higher than the average, then I'd be more keen. But yeah, no, I'm not big on Fields. So my first guy, my riser on the defensive line this week is Carl Granderson. I've got him as my edge 25 or my DL 35, one behind Deron Payne, who I might have to move down. So he's banged up at the moment, and one ahead of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. So I was initially a bit skeptical about Granderson. I'll be honest. He's one of those guys who had been producing sacks at a decent rate, but it appeared to be unsustainable given his pressure rate. But I'm pretty open-minded. and that's kind of an approach that's been helping me quite a lot in fantasy over the years. Having these opinions, having these beliefs, but also being open to the idea that you should change your mind if you see something different. So that's kind of what I've seen in Granderson. So this year, through 2 games, he's got 3 sacks. He's tied for 4th amongst all edge rushers in pressure, and his win rate is an impressive 25%. According to PFF. His snap share is also really healthy, 75% week 1, 73% week 2. It's really good for an edge rusher. And I think with Peyton Turner out with a turf toe injury that required surgery, I can see the Saints kind of continuing to lean on Granderson. So yeah, really like the guy. I think it does come with one caveat. The Saints play the Packers this weekend, and Granderson, one of Granderson's main opponents would be David Bakhtiari if Bakhtiari plays, but obviously Bakhtiari missed week 2 with a knee injury that's been bothering him for some time. So we know Bakhtiari is elite in pass protection, and that would mean a very difficult matchup for Granderson if he was able to play. So, but yeah, if Bakhtiari can't go, or if he's struggling but still plays, then yeah, Granderson's matchup improves considerably. The 7th round rookie that played in Bakhtiari's stead, Quay Walker, he kind of looked good against the Falcons last week. But yeah, those Falcons edge rushers are nothing special at all. Nothing on Granderson's level anyway.
Yeah, and the Packers do a lot to get rid of the ball quickly out of Love's hands too. They do a lot of quick hitters just to kind of help him out. Obviously, if he only had 157 yards passing in the game or something like that, that's not a lot of holding on the ball along deep routes. So,
yep, that's very true. Good point. So, who's your second defensive lineman that you're keen on this week?
I've been obsessed with Harrison Phillips the last couple of weeks. Defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. He's just getting a ton of play right now. He's got 120 snaps in 2 games. His career high for snaps was 738 snaps 3 years ago. And at his current pace, he's going to crush that by week 13. And as you know, like, volume is king in IDP. Like, if you're playing a ton of snaps, you're going to be getting points. And right now he's just playing a ton of snaps. He's got an extremely high tackle floor, and he's scoring well right now without a lot of big splash plays. Like, he doesn't have, I think he's got like 1 sack, but he's doing this all with tackles. And those sacks and those forced fumbles will be coming. Like, you play this many snaps, you're gonna run into some sacks and things like that. And so he's doing all of this without those. And I just can't imagine his scores once he starts getting a couple of those sprinkled in over the next few weeks. His PFF scores, like you mentioned before, are some really nice shades of green. And there's not a lot of green things right now in Wisconsin and Minnesota, like with it turning fall. And to see that green on his PFF grades is awesome. And they're in great spots too. Like in his overall, his run defense and his tackling are all super, super high scoring right now. Danielle Hunter is going to be commanding a lot of pressure, Danielle Hunter is going to be commanding a lot of attention, especially after he is off to a hot start. He has 4 sacks. So he's going to be drawing some attention. That's going to free up Phillips a little bit. And if you're playing in a league where defensive tackles are required, Phillips is like probably one of the most elite options you can have right now this season. He's easily a D-tackle 1, and so if he's playing in defensive lineman leagues and he's scoring this well, I can only imagine what he's doing in defensive tackle leagues. So
yeah, I like it. I probably overlooked Phillips in my week 1 rankings. I didn't have him ranked.
I don't think anyone did.
No, but he's now my DT 16 heading into to week 3. He's got one of the things I like about him, he's got a really healthy snap share. I talk about it a lot, but like you say, volume is king. You can't score points unless you're on the field, right? So he's got a really healthy snap share for an interior defensive lineman, and in that sense, he's kind of closer to the likes of sort of Aaron Donald or Zach Allen than he is someone like Quinn Williams, and that helps him, like you say, rack up the kind of tackle volume that we're seeing. It's fantastic. And I will point out though that he's kind of one of those guys that you need to look at your league scoring. He's either really good, or if you fade tackle scoring a little bit, then he might not be quite where you want him to be. He is a bit limited as a pass rusher, but like you say, that tackle volume alone gives him a really safe weekly floor. And I think in DT required leagues that do score tackles reasonably well, he's at least a solid DT2. I'm open-minded to increasing his placing in my rankings, but yeah, really like what I see. Agree with everything you said. So my second guy is also a DT, and it's Javon Hargrove. So he's my DT3, one behind Quinn and Williams this week, and one ahead of Joey Bosa. So yeah, Hargrave's had a really solid start to the season for his new team. Currently tied in 7th amongst all interior defensive linemen with 7 pressures, and his win rate really impressive, 31%. But what I like about Hargrave this week in particular is that he's facing the Giants, and we saw, we all saw what the Cowboys did to that offensive line in the opening game of the season. 7 sacks, 2 of which came from interior guys, Osa Odigizua, and yeah, that interior of that offensive line could be depleted this week, as I think they've got a guard who suffered a concussion last weekend. I forget his name. I really think they're going to have their hands full with Hargrave this week. I think he's a fantastic player. He's got a nice matchup. He's in form. There's a lot to like.
Yeah, and especially if Barkley doesn't play, that offense is going to be much more limited to what they're going to be capable of doing. They don't have to worry about the passing game from the running backs as much, and I just think that just makes the game much simpler for an already amazing defense. So, yeah.
Yep, agreed. So let's talk about some of the guys we don't like. Who do you have amongst defensive linemen that you don't like for week 3?
One of the guys I really am kind of fading across many of my leagues right now is Haason Reddick. He had a monstrous 2022, as we all know. He had led the league with 21 sacks. He had 53 hurries, QB hurries on 512 snaps, and that was good for almost an 11% pass rushing efficiency. So he was getting quite a bit of pressure on the quarterbacks with the snaps. This year, he has 5 hurries on 72 pass rushing attempts, which is a little less than 6%. So he's almost lost like 50% of his pass rushing. We both know that like sacks are kind of a fluky and unpredictable stat anyway. But that was where he made his bread and butter last year, and he's just not having any of that this year. That defensive line, or that whole defensive unit, is just kind of an embarrassment of riches. Like, the defensive line is just outstanding. He's actually ranked 6th on their defensive line alone in pass rushing efficiency. So not in the league, on his own team. So that just kind of goes to show how deep that defensive line is. And they're heavily rotating players this year, whereas last year he was probably getting a little more run and snap counts, where this year much more of a heavy rotation. You can't really blame the injury that he had in the preseason, because it was a thumb injury, and I don't know how much a thumb has to do with pass rushing efficiency. Apparently it has a lot to do with it. So I just feel that like a defensive end or defensive tackle or defensive end, like Reddick, where you took him, and right now he's pretty highly ranked, right around late 1, early 2 range. I've kind of got him almost closer to the DL3, D lineman 27, 28 range. So if I had him, and I'm looking to move him if I have that opportunity. So
yeah, I think you're echoing the thoughts of a lot of people out there at the minute. Like you say, he's one of those edge rushers that people took super high in drafts. Probably amongst that group, or the top of that group, behind those elite sort of 5 that we often talk about, and we're not seeing the return. So yeah, there's a lot of us that are concerned with what we've seen or what we haven't seen from Reddick so far this year. I'm not ready to move him in the leagues that I've got him in. I think I'll be selling him at his at a low, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how he does against some right tackles who aren't quite as good as Brian O'Neill of the Vikings, who we played against last week. I forget the name of the Bucks right tackle that he's playing this weekend. Second year guy.
Is that Wirfs?
He started the year pretty well. So yeah, I'm kind of playing the waiting game with Reddick and hoping that that this is the week where he starts to put it all together. But yeah, I have lowered him in my rankings. He's my DL 19 or Edge 15 this week. I forget exactly where I had him last week. It was near a sort of DL 7, DL 6 territory, I think. So yeah, I'm not quite as concerned, but yeah, I'm still worried.
Are you at all concerned, like with the rotation with that Phillies unit right now? Because I mean, they're like just extremely loaded. You know, even like Nolan Smith is starting to get a little more run now in week 2. Like, and that has to come at someone's expense. You know, so I don't know. Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, a little. I don't think he's playing. I don't think his snap share is that much lower than it was at times last year. I know he played, he had a bigger snap share in the second half of last year, but I think he's somewhere around that 60, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 67, 68% on average this year, whereas last year it was just above 70. But so no, I'm not as concerned about the snap share. I'm more concerned about what will happen to that snap share if he continues to be ineffective. Like you say, they've got other guys there now. They always have. Josh Sweat's playing really well, and he's seeing a greater snap share than he's used to seeing. Nolan Smith waiting in the wings. They got a couple of veterans still there who were really productive last year. So yeah, I'm not as concerned with what I've seen in the first 2 games as far as snap share is concerned. I'm more concerned about what will happen going forward if things don't change. First fate for me is we talked about the Giants defensive line, or you did. So Kayvon Thibodeaux. He's my edge 38 or my DL 28, one behind Gregory Rousseau and one ahead of Samson Ebukam. So I've got him here for a number of reasons. Firstly, he's had a really slow start. He's only had a couple of pressures, 4 tackles, and obviously no sacks in 2 games. And while I do think he's going to find his feet at some point, he's too good not to. I think he might find life really difficult this weekend against the 49ers. He lines up on the right edge more often than not. And Trent Williams, as we all know, is as good as any at the position, possibly, the best. He's allowed only 2 sacks in the last 2 seasons. Thibodeaux also lines up on the other edge occasionally, where he'll find life much, much easier. But yeah, as I say, by and large, he's going to be going up against Trent Williams. Don't like the matchup. Don't like how he's playing. It's just not a situation that I want to get too invested in for week 3.
I totally agree, and he was my next guy up, so great minds must think alike. It pains me to put him on this list because I was so high on him after the finish of last season, the last 3 games of last season. We just saw those glimpses and those flashes of why he went so high in the draft. And, I think he had didn't he have like a 30 or 40 point game to end the season? Like it was just nuts. And then even in the preseason, he had flashes, he had a sack and very limited snaps. And it was like, this is it. This is the breakout year. And then, like you said, we're 2 games in and he's got 4 tackles. He's got like a QB hurry or something like that. And last week he laid a 0, in some leagues scoring. And it was just like, you can't have that, especially with a guy like with the draft capital and the tout that you put into Thibodeaux. You can't take zeros in your lineups. And like you said, until he proves otherwise, you can't trust him. So, and you said, the matchup this week is not the one to probably turn it around.
That's it. He's another guy for me, though. We did invest so much in him where we have him that you can drop him from your lineup if you've got better options, but you're kind of stuck with him on your roster, and I don't think that's a bad thing because I think his value will recover. He's clearly not going to play this poorly all year. I think I saw Azeez Ojulari is out this week as well. So that they're not turning to anybody else. We've just got to play the waiting game. I'm sure he'll recover in time. I just don't think it's going to be this weekend.
Yeah, and he's played a ton of snaps. He has 102 snaps this season, by far the most on the Giants' defensive line. So like you said, he's not losing snaps. They're not going to not play him, but he just, at some point, he's got to get some run and make some plays. And, like between him and Reddick, I know you did a lot of best ball drafts. Those guys were going like at the turn, like that 12-13 turn pretty consistently. And for them to have that kind of investment and both of them kind of laying eggs already in the season. It's not a good look, or it's not good for managers right now. So.
No, it isn't. It isn't. You're right. So who's the second defensive lineman who you're fading week 3?
It was him. It was Thibodeaux. I had Thibodeaux and then, Reddick. So
got you. So my second is, and this will be a bit of a contentious one. It's Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. So I've got him as my edge 26 or my DL 36, one behind Carl Granderson and one ahead of Gregory Rousseau. Like I say, it may seem like a bit of an odd call at first, given how he played last weekend. Had must be one of the most productive games of his career with 6 pressures and a couple of sacks. But matchup matters. Last week he was playing against the Bears, and as we talked about earlier, the Bears not been very good in pass pro. Justin Fields hasn't really helped himself out. Braxton Jones, another guy on the offensive line who just hasn't acquitted himself well. 40 pressures and 7 sacks Jones allowed in 2022. This weekend, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka faces Lane Johnson, who's allowed 7 sacks in the last 6 years. So I'm just not keen on his matchup. It's as simple as that. The Eagles are a 3rd in rushing attempts and 26th in passing attempts so far. I know the game scripts have influenced those figures, skewed those figures, but they're the favorites against the Bucs, and I think we could see them playing with a lead again, which might limit pass rush opportunities for Tryon-Shoyinka. So I mean, you know what, it's brave or foolish to bet against a guy who's coming off a career game. I just don't like his chances of a repeat performance this weekend.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I know somewhere Jay Cohagen just died a little bit when you said his name was on the fade list. So, yeah, I agree with you. Like, for all those same reasons, it's hard like to mock a guy or take a guy down after having such a great week. But like you said, matchups matter. And a guy that's given up fewer sacks than Trent Williams did, you know, the reason we're fading Thibodeaux this week, not only poor production, but he's going up against like maybe the best in class. And, you know, Lane Johnson's not a slouch either. And for him to only give up 6 sacks, like 1 a season, that's probably not the weekend that's going to happen for another one. So,
yeah. It is a tough call, but I've got thick skin. So if I'm wrong, I'll be on here next week admitting my mistake. I promise.
This is a safe place. It's a safe place.
So are we ready to move on to the defensive backs?
Let's do it.
Okay. Who are your DB risers for week 3?
I am all in on Jevon Holland for the Miami Dolphins. He's leading the league right now in tackles by safety with 23 combined tackles. He's played 152 snaps, which is also leading the league at the position. His positive game script, the Dolphins offense has just been playing outstanding. So I think he gets a lot of opportunities to make big plays, whether it's in the passing game or rushing the quarterback. I think that positive game script has an impact on him that way. He's currently in a lot of places like DB 18 mid, but I could easily take him 10 spots higher. He's a safe DB1 in my opinion right now. His PFF scores are like super dark green and almost blue in some areas, which is amazing for efficiency across the board. I don't think there's a metric where he's not like in the top 10 right now across the board. He's just playing outstanding ball. He's locked in and he's just playing really, really well. So
yeah, I love this call. He's one of my DB risers as well. So I'll talk about him next. You've covered you know, a lot of why I like him. He is my DB 18. But you know, he's rising fast. One thing I really like about him this year under Vic Fangio is his usage. So we're used to seeing him play in that sort of much deeper role in the last couple of years, and that's kind of limited his tackle opportunities. He was in a deep role in 71.9% of his time in 2021 and 70% in 2022. This year, he's only spent 46% of his time lined up deep, and instead he's being used in the slot and in the box much more often, which is really helping him produce the tackles that we talked about, you know, double-digit tackles in both games so far this season. I think the early returns have been encouraging, and you know, I know he won't be as productive every week, DBs are volatile. I say the same every week. I fancy him to be a much more consistent performer than we've seen in years past, with a much safer floor. I do wonder whether it's going to sort of adversely affect some of the big plays that he would make in coverage. He was a fairly reliable source of interceptions and pass breakups. But I'm being super picky. I'd much rather have that safe weekly floor.
Totally. And you mentioned like all of those snaps that he's playing closer to the line. Is that because of Holland as the player has improved and progressed to that, or is that because the Dolphins are without Brandon Jones right now? Like when Jones finally gets back in the mix, they got Deshaun Elliott, they're playing safety, and he's much more of a natural free safety. Is it out of necessity that he's playing towards the line, or is he just improved as a player and earned that role? I don't have the right answer. I'm just spitballing here.
I think, if anything, Elliott might be playing a little further back than Holland as the deeper safety. So, yeah, I'm not complaining. I've got more of Holland than I have of Elliott, and right. Elliott's been no slouch himself. On that point, though, about Jones, Brandon Jones, I am slightly disappointed. He was like a bit of a favorite of mine in years gone by. Couldn't be relied upon to play a full 16 games, full 17 games each season. But he was one of those guys that you could always rely on him to play, like Holland is doing, maybe even more so than Holland, actually. Really, really close to the line of scrimmage, and really, really, really like good supply of tackles. But we have to move on.
Especially with that linebacker core, which is kind of like looking for an identity. Obviously you guys mentioned it last week on the show with like David Long just kind of being like, they signed him to this deal and they barely used him, and they just kind of got this weird rotation of like a Baker and, just not sure. And like that role that both Holland and Jones had played, it was kind of almost like that second or third linebacker at times for him. So I think that's a benefit to them and scoring. So.
Yeah. Though interesting to see Long snap share increase so much from week 1 to week 2, but not at the expense of Baker. I can't wait to see what happens in week 3. I didn't expect that. Slight tangent. I just didn't expect Baker to be the every down guy. Expected it to be Long. And again, didn't expect Long's snap share to increase so much from week 1 to week 2. He was in the 80s, I think, in week 2. So he's kind of back on my radar a little bit.
We need to get your boy Phillips back and healthy back on that line, because I think they kind of shuffled some things around. Didn't they have like Van Ginkel or something playing a little more of the Phillips role, and that kind of rotated Long? It's just a mess.
And yeah, you're right. And I think that's possibly the reason why Long played so many snaps as an off-ball linebacker in week 2 in place of what Van Ginkel was doing, where he plays like you say, he was playing on the edge almost full time in place of Phillips. So that's got to be the reason, really. Be interesting to see again what happens in week 3 if Phillips is back. I know he's still questionable. So he was just healthy enough to secure a win for the Dolphins against my Chargers, and he's been out since. So your next defensive back, who are you keen on week 3?
Yeah, the next guy I'm really high on is Jessie Bates, formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals and now of the awesomely hot Atlanta Falcons. All of a sudden their team is playing well. I think that creates a lot of opportunity for him on the back end. He's just always one of those ball hawking safeties that always finds a way to come up with big plays. He's got 14 tackles already on the season. He has 2 interceptions, a forced fumble. He's just kind of doing it all for that defense that's very young. And I think they're kind of looking for like a little veteran leadership. And I think he kind of relishes that role after kind of being like cast aside in Cincinnati. He's kind of looked at this is an opportunity for me to show not only the Bengals, but the league, like, hey, you guys made a mistake. Let's look what we can do here. He's one of the highest graded safeties He's the highest graded safety with safeties that have more than 25 snaps. He's a mid DB2 in a lot of places. I think he should be a lot higher than that. His matchup this weekend against Detroit, Detroit's going to throw a lot. I'm not really sure if their running back situation is going to look like if Montgomery's out. If Montgomery is out, I can see him going to a lot of pass plays. So I just think that's a great matchup for Bates this weekend. So.
Yeah. Like you say, he's not only playing really well, he's also being really productive. That week 1 performance in particular was just special, wasn't it? Yeah, he's not a guy who's going to keep up with the leaders at the position in tackle in most years anyway, typically because he plays so deep, but he's always been a threat to come up with 3 or 4 interceptions every year and a solid number of pass breakups, and those trends seem to be continuing this year. But yeah, I love the call. I moved him up from my DB 19 in week 2 to my DB 15 spot in week 3 after his fast start. Long may it continue. My next DB that I like is Kayvon Wallace. So he's my safety 50 or DB 63, one behind L'Jarius Sneed and one ahead of Alohi Gilman. Why? So we know Budda Baker's placed on IR with a hamstring injury, and he'll miss at least the next 4 games. And on the basis of what we saw last weekend, Wallace is set for an expanded role in Baker's absence. He played every down, spent an incredible 72% of his snaps either in the box or on the defensive line, and the results were promising. He finished with 8 tackles and 2 QB hurries. I still have him ranked pretty low because I need to know that he's going to retain that role. But he's definitely one who we could see rise pretty sharply in future weeks if his usage continues.
Yeah, he was always one of my favorites when he was in Philadelphia. He was always my guy that I would stash at the end of the season, just thinking this is the year he's going to hit. This is the year he's going to hit. And he never really hit. And then I finally let him go, and then he grew his wings in Arizona and finally got a chance to fly. So I like that call.
Yeah. I just didn't expect him to be playing. So yeah, he's been on no one's radar. Don't think anybody expected him to be playing as big a role, and certainly not the kind of role that he's playing. Who can foresee these injuries happening to some of these star players? Real shame what's happened to Budda Baker, but we roll along.
Even before the injury, he was getting quite a few, a good run. Week 1, he was playing pretty well, and then obviously week 2, and then when Budda went down. But I mean, he was getting some play even in week 1, and I kind of had him on this watch list as far as potential ads. And all of a sudden, week 2 hit, and then the Budda Baker stuff hit, and I was he's a slam dunk right now. Especially in that defense that's kind of void of a lot of talent after they traded away Simmons, and Xavier Collins moved from linebacker to the defense. So there's definitely an opportunity for tackles there. So
yeah, like I say, started fast in that sense. So definitely one to add to your waivers, and it could be a very, very rewarding starting option down the line. So fades. Who are you out on at the defensive back position? Who don't you like?
I'm kind of out right now on Harrison Smith. Again, just kind of the theme of the night, playing a ton of snaps, just not being very productive in those snaps. And it's kind of sad, the fall from grace that Smith has had. He was a perennial top 12 defensive back. He was a set it and forget it type of player. And he's more just forget it now than he is anything else. He's played 142 snaps. He only has 8 combined tackles. He's clearly getting outplayed by both Cameron Bynum and Jot Metlis. He's looking old. He's clearly lost his step. He has 3 missed tackles already on the season, where he only had 10 all of last season. So he's clearly playing there. This offseason, he was a possible cut or trade candidate. And if the Vikings season continues the way it is, they might be, looking to the future. He might be a trade or a cut just to kind of move towards the future. I know a lot of places have him still ranked as in a DB1 range just because of the name and the history, but anything close to DB3, late DB3, early DB4, I'm kind of out on him. So he's almost unstartable. It's gotten so bad. I tried to trade him for fifth and sixth round picks in my leagues and getting rejected for that. So kind of just shows where he's kind of fallen from.
Yeah. Another good call. And it kind of pains me to admit it. Sounds like you're in a similar boat. Smith's been one of my favorite safeties for many years, that sort of do-it-all safety. Really, really, really good player in his prime, but like you say, he's not playing at the level that we're used to seeing, and he's not being as productive as we've grown used to over the years. He's dropping in my rankings. He will probably drop further. And like you say, it's fair to wonder whether age is just catching up with him. What is he now? 30, 34, 35?
Yeah, for sure he's 33. He probably is 34, 35.
Okay, yeah.
He seems like he's been in the league forever. As a Packer fan, I've watched him terrorize the Packers for a number of years, and so there were some. Even he goes back to the Brett Favre days, so that just kind of tells you. No, not that far, but.
Yeah, it's sad to see, but age catches up to us all. So my first DB fade is a guy I mentioned last week, but I'm cheating a little bit by mentioning him for the second week in a row. But I want to talk about him because he's one of the biggest talking points in IDP this year, and things have gone from bad in week 1 to even worse in week 2. So it's Jeremy Chinn. I've actually got him unranked now. Couldn't believe I'd be saying that after 2 weeks of the season, but he's the biggest faller for me, unrelated to an injury at the position this week. As I kind of pointed out last week, the signs have been there for a while, going all the way back to the preseason. In week 1, he had a 73% snap share, which was fewer than both Von Bell and Xavier Woods. And last week, he played only 35% of the available snaps. I did a kind of a double take when I saw it. So yeah, I mean, unless either of the guys ahead of him suffers an injury, Chinn just can't be started and should not even be rostered outside of the deepest dynasty leagues. He's still second on the team for time spent in the slot, but the favored option in that role appears to be like 31-year-old Troy Hill, who played under Evero in the past. So there's that familiarity level there with Hill. It just looks like Chinn's become, he's a guy that you just cannot roster even anymore. Massive fall from grace.
Yeah, what a fall from grace that is. Like 2 years ago, he was going as the DB1. He has a hybrid role as a linebacker. He was like, you could have got a king's ransom for him, and now it's like you said, he's just like almost unrosterable.
Yeah, I don't have the ADP from those best balls that we did with the IDP show. But I'd be amazed if he wasn't one of the top 12 safeties being taken on average before the season started, even after what we saw in the preseason, even in those drafts that we did after the actual preseason games. It's shocked a lot of people, but here we are. Opportunities go to other people.
Yep. And I think that goes, a lot of these guys that we mentioned tonight on our fades, it's a lot to do with name recognition, where it's the name that they tie that past production to, and they're just kind of hitching their wagon to those players that, last year they were really good. And, defensive side of the ball changes way faster than the offensive side of the ball in fantasy. And so, you really got to be on it to be competitive year after year, because, the guys that were relevant last week might not even be so this week. So
yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of not being relevant, this one's going to be, I'm going to have to duck when I say this name, but my next DB fade is Kyle Hamilton. And again, he's one of those guys that was highly touted, really high draft capital coming out of Notre Dame, landed in an ideal spot. The Ravens moved on from Chuck Clark. It was like, here's the king to the castle. This is all you, and he was probably going, in those best ball drafts, like you mentioned, easily top 10 defensive back. And here we are 2 weeks into it, and he has 136 snaps, which is great, but only 6 combined tackles. It's kind of really surprising that he can be in the role that he is in and not be productive or more productive. Geno Stone, who is the other safety for the Ravens, is actually outscoring him, and he's actually scoring grading-wise better than Hamilton is at the moment. So I think this provides a great buy opportunity from Hamilton right now. If you have the owner who's frustrated with him, who's like, he has 8 points so far in Big 3 scoring through 2 weeks, and so I think if there is a buy window on a player like this, and you think that he's going to be able to turn around, and you feel that the pedigree is there and the team investment is there, this might be your chance to buy low on a really impactful player going forward.
Yeah. I was one of those guys. I was one of those guys. I had him in my top 5 safeties coming into the year, based on what we saw towards the back end of last year. And like you say, there's opportunities opening up for him with the team trading away other players at the position. Yeah, he's fallen already in my rankings, and will continue to do so unless things change pretty fast. There was a glimmer of hope in the sense that, like you say, he's playing every down still. They're not going to drop him anytime soon, and I do kind of like his matchup against the Colts this weekend, whether Anthony Richardson can play or not. Yeah. I'm just really sad. I'm just really sad about it. You'll have to give me a moment to just kind of reflect on what we're not seeing from Hamilton. Again, it's been only 2 weeks, but yeah, going back to your point a moment ago, I'm more agile, more reactive with my evaluation and view on defensive backs than I am for any other position in IDP. So while it has only been 2 weeks, I've got no qualms in dropping him in my rankings, and let's just hope he can put it all together again very soon.
Do you still value him as like a dynasty asset at the position? Like I know it's really volatile, and that's like the in fantasy football, it's the most turned over position from year to year. But do you still value him as like an asset or a cornerstone at the position going forward?
I wouldn't say cornerstone, and it kind of I never trade for any safety. There's just so many of them. There's so many safeties, and if you're combining CBs and DBs, and there's even more startable options every week. Even in really deep leagues, you can always find somebody, and that replacement value from a Kyle Hamilton to somebody else is the drop off is never that great. We were talking about Troy Hill a minute ago. Who saw him playing a role coming into this season. Kayvon Wallace. These guys. Even if you don't start the year with enough DBs, enough good startable DBs, you can pick them up real quickly. I'm as a dynasty asset, I'd be more than happy to trade away Hamilton now. But that's as much about the fact he is a DB as it is about the fact he's not playing well. To be honest with you, though, if I had him, I'd probably keep him, wait for him to round back into form again, and then probably look to trade him away when his value's recovered a little bit.
Who is your last fade?
Yeah, it's Rodney McLeod. He's now unranked. So he hasn't. Well, I say he's now unranked. Technically, he hasn't actually fallen in my rankings at all because I had him outside the top 75 in week 2. But I wanted to mention him as I was considering and placing him in my rankings for week 3 until I saw his usage last week. He played every down in week 1. But Thornhill returned from a calf injury to play every down in week 2, and with Grant Delpit occupying the other role, it meant that McLeod was the odd man out. I kind of failed to make a note of his snap share, but it was in the 30s, I believe. He's one of those guys who's been a really good coverage safety throughout his career, and in fact, just last year, arguably his best season in his 30s. But Thornhill's younger. He's got a multi-year contract, and he's no scrub himself as a deep safety. I think the role is his to keep, and McLeod's really an afterthought at this point.
And it's kind of interesting too, because the mess that's the Cleveland Browns linebacking core right now, you'd think they would need someone else to step up and do something on that defensive side of the ball, and for him not to be able to make an impact, even with between Walker and JOK, there's just opportunity there, but he's clearly not seizing advantage of it. So
yeah, like you say, I mean, there's an argument to say maybe Delpit's playing in the box quite a lot. Maybe he should be playing in the box even more with McLeod and Thornhill on the back end. But what the hell do I know? I'm not a defensive coordinator. So these guys,
you and the Bears defensive coordinator have something in common now. So you both don't have a job.
Very true. Very true. And with that does bring us to the end of the show. It's been an absolute joy having you with me tonight, Jeff. Your insight is second to none. I hope our listeners have taken away some nuggets to help them win their week 3 matchups. So would you mind just reminding, telling our listeners where they can find you on X, and share a little bit about what you're doing in terms of content this year?
Sure. You can find me on on Twitter or X now. It's at boobam131. I did a lot of the preseason work. I did the IDP minutes and got a lot of love from those, and I enjoyed doing them. That was kind of fun. And so now I've kind of turned my attention to the waiver wire articles, which is available on the website for the IDP show on Monday evening, so you can get a head start on that. And then also with the teaser video comes out on Tuesday morning. So
yeah, those I told you a while back, but those IDP minutes were awesome. If people needed like a real quick pit stop update on the latest information that they might have missed, then they were superb. And the preview videos you're doing for the waiver wire article as well, equally as good. So yeah, if you're not following Jeff, then shame on you. Go and do it now. And keep your eyes peeled for his waiver wire article. If any listeners want to follow me on X, you can find me at Jase Abbey, and the full rankings we've touched on today are available to subscribers on the IDP show Substack at theidpshow.com. A huge thanks to everyone who's tuned in. It's always appreciated, and good luck in week 3. I'll be back again next week to talk week 4 rankings with Joseph Hagan, aka Joey the Tooth. For now, bye.
This was the IDP After Show.